Police abuse remains one of the most serious and divisive human rights violations in the United States today. The horrific images of Rodney King being beat by the LAPD and the execution of Oscar Grant by the BART police are some of the most blatant reminders of police brutality against innocent victims. The excessive use of force by police officers, including unjustified shootings, severe beatings, and fatal chokings, persist because overwhelming barriers to accountability make it possible for officers who commit human rights violations to escape due punishment and often to repeat their offenses. Police and public officials greet each new report of brutality with denials or explain that the act was just an aberration, while the administrative and criminal systems that should deter these abuses by holding officers accountable instead virtually grant them impunity. This special insider exclusive investigation discovered that police brutality is persistent and rampant across America, and that systems to deal with abuse have failed, and that victims seeking redress face daunting obstacles at every point in the process, ranging from overt intimidation to the reluctance of local and federal prosecutors to take on brutality cases of officers who have committed these human rights violations. Despite claims to the contrary from city officials where abuses have become scandals in the media, efforts to make meaningful reforms have fallen short. The barriers to accountability are remarkably similar from city to city. Shortcomings in recruitment, training, and management are common to all. So is the fact that officers who repeatedly commit human rights violations tend to be a small minority who taint entire police departments but are protected routinely by the silence of their fellow officers and by flawed systems of reporting, oversight, and accountability. Today, the Justice in America Network TV series examines this epidemic in this new exclusive TV special, Prince George's County Police Department Brutality and Murder, William H. Green's story, and how famed Baltimore trial lawyer Billy Murphy Jr., senior partner Murphy, Falcon, and Murphy got justice for William H. Green, who was murdered in cold blood by former Baltimore police officer Michael Owen on January 27, 2020, shot 6 times while Green was handcuffed behind his back, sitting in Owen's police cruiser. Owen was arrested and charged with second-degree murder, manslaughter, involuntary manslaughter, first-degree assault, and use of a firearm in the commission of a crime of violence. This was Owen's 3rd shooting in his 10 years of duty, and his employer, Prince George's County Police Department, hadn't ever done anything about his erratic and dangerous behavior, or their own police department's extensive history of brutality, racism, poor training, and supervision. After an extensive investigation by Murphy, Falcon, and Murphy, it was revealed that Owen had physically brutalized and violated no less than 7 additional citizens, all of whom are black, prior to murdering William Green. After settling the case on September 28, 2020 for $20 million, his firm filed another lawsuit in December of 2021, a federal civil rights mass action against Prince George's County on behalf of these 7 additional victims. In this special edition of Justice in America, our news team sits down with Billy and his guests to discuss this latest lawsuit and what it means for the Prince George's County Police Department and citizens. You will see how Billy is proving these cases by exposing the lies and the contradictions of the Prince George's County Police Department. As Billy has often said, the problem of police brutality is much more widespread than most Americans are willing to admit. Our nation practices a selective blindness. In this great and strong nation, we have all become unwitting accomplices to the continuation of the conflict. Billy has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in Baltimore, Maryland, and across America. He has seen many innocent and hardworking people become victims of police brutality. He understands that police brutality is one of the most serious, enduring, and divisive human rights violations in the United States. And the problem is not just in Prince George's County, but nationwide, and its nature is institutionalized. And because of that, he is driven to fight for people who have been harmed by the willful or negligent actions of others. He learned a long time ago that if a man hasn't discovered something he will die for, he isn't fit to live. His goals, not only to get justice for his clients, but to make sure all Americans have the right to a fair trial, honest cops, impartial prosecutors, and fair judges with no agendas. Because injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, and justice and power must be brought together so that whatever is just may be powerful, and whatever is powerful may be just. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Baltimore. It is my great pleasure to introduce Billy Murphy Jr. and Malcolm Ruff to the show. Welcome to the show, guys.
Hello.
Tell our audience a little bit about your firm. You're well known in not only you, Billy, criminal defense, but also civil cases. What do you guys primarily practice? What kind of cases you look for?
We look for catastrophic injury cases of all kinds. They can be because of racism. They can be because of medical malpractice. They can have any root cause. Because we're very concerned that in the modern era, the criminal justice system and the civil justice system are malfunctioning badly. These so-called reforms that you hear about are slow to be implemented to the point where you can't see the implementation. Everybody's committing everything, and the criminal justice system is in such bad shape that I don't believe that justice occurs on a regular basis. It occurs too infrequently.
I often hear some lawyers saying that the American justice system is the best system in the world. Is that true?
It was designed to be the best system in the world, but only the rich can really get the best out of it. The poor cannot. The poor don't get equal representation in court. They get what poor people can afford to get. And that means that most poor people in the criminal justice system especially get little or nothing. It's tragic. And so I came into the system hating it. I came into the system understanding that it was not designed for us. It was designed for whites who were well off. And so poor whites and all black people have a hard time getting justice in America.
Mm-hmm. Now, Malcolm, you guys primarily represent the little guy. Why do you do that? Why do you do what I call God's work?
Because we come from those backgrounds. Billy was raised right here in South Baltimore. I was raised in West Baltimore. We did not come from money, but we came from families that had the social consciousness to stand up for what we know is right, and also to stand up for black people who have consistently and throughout our history been utterly disenfranchised from the system. Just as Billy told us, the system is flawed, it is not equitable, and it is our duty in order to stand up for what we know is right, to stand in the gap for people who can't protect themselves and cannot advocate for themselves.
Before we get into the case, and we're going to be talking about William H. Green's case that you got settled, never even filed a lawsuit, I want to go to a news clip to let our audience know a little bit about the background, what happened here, and let's do that now.
Good morning. It's a bad day for this family, and we're here to demand prompt and thorough justice for this family while they are in terrible grief over the sudden loss of their loved one. We are here to demand prompt justice for this family to make them whole after the horrible and tragic and completely unnecessary death of William Howard Green, affectionately known to all of the people behind me as Boo Boo. He was a wonderful human being, full of humor, life, love, affection, and he was close to everyone you see behind me now. And this family's grief can only be assuaged by not only justice for this officer, but justice for Mom and his 2 kids. We're here to demand that that justice be administered fairly and swiftly, both for the officer and for this family. The coroner has ruled that this is a homicide. And never before have we seen such swift and decisive action from a police chief, who we salute today for doing that, from Prosecutor Aisha Braveboy, your great state's attorney, and from your county executive, who is also mourning this tragic death. But that grief has to be translated into justice. And so we're asking that there be a thorough investigation, not only of the incident, but of this officer's past uses of force, so that justice can be administered not only about this, but about the totality of his existence as a police officer. And we also ought to look at the police policies,
Amen.
which have let this officer continue to serve, given his capacity to do what he did 2 days ago. I'm going to turn this over now briefly to Mr. Green's mother and to Mr. Green's 2 children. Mother?
Bless your mother.
Take your time now.
Good morning. My name is Brenda Green, and I'm here for my son, William Green. He needs justice because it's just not right. I love and miss my son. I never see my son again. And something has to be done.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from his daughter. Step forward and identify yourself.
Hello, my name is Brenda Green, and William Green was my best friend, my protector, but most importantly, he was my daddy. We talked every day, sometimes twice a day. He would start my morning off by calling me and telling me to have a great day, and he made sure he ended it by telling me good night. I'm the true definition of a daddy's girl who no longer has her daddy with her. I dreamt of the day that my daddy could be able to walk me down the aisle, and I wanted him to be able to see his future grandchildren, but that day will never come now. Thank you.
God bless you.
And now from his son.
My name William Little. I don't really have too much to say because it's a lot to process right now. So I'm going to just keep it at that. We miss him, and you know that.
Bless your son. Bless you.
Now, what kind of man was he? A horrible loss that must be fairly addressed. I am too familiar with these constant police deaths and with this constant police brutality, and this has to go down as one of the worst incidents in American history, and it has shocked the nation. It must be stopped.
Yeah.
The resources have to be gathered so that these things must be stopped. If it takes an overhaul of how we police, it must be done. If it takes more money to make people safe, it must be spent, so that never again will we see this phenomenon of death after death after death after death after death.
County executive says that this is the first time in history that a Prince George's County police officer has been charged with murder in an on-duty shooting. But even before Corporal Michael Owen goes on trial in the criminal case, the county has settled out of court civilly with the victim's family for $20 million.
This does nothing for us, but just closes this chapter and helps us move on to what's next.
William Green's big extended family called him Boo Boo and said he was the glue that held them together. In January, after a report he had driven into some parked cars in Temple Hills, police detained him and placed him handcuffed, wrists behind his back, in the front passenger seat of a cruiser. Within minutes, Corporal Owen allegedly fired 6 shots into Green, killing him. The former judge who mediated the civil settlement says the facts here are as bad as the facts in the case of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd.
And the facts were uniformly bad, more aggravating in some instances than the more high-profile cases that have gone on around the country.
While $20 million is a historic number, the family's lawyer says it could have gone much higher.
To all of those who may second guess the number, it would have been much worse if we'd gone to trial.
The county executive says even $20 million cannot compensate for the loss of Green's life, but she also defended the police department's progress.
When we need to defend our department, we will, and when we need to make reforms, we will.
Green's niece says that the family plans to use at least some of the money to set up a foundation in his name, not to remember how he died, but to pay tribute to how he lived.
What happened that night?
William Green was driving a vehicle on St. Barnabas Road in Prince George's County, and he was under the influence. He had an accident where he crashed into multiple vehicles and ended up ending at a tree. Police were called, and unfortunately for the Green family, for William Green, one of those officers was Corporal Michael Owen. He responded to the scene, and there's video footage from members of that community who came out of their homes after the accident. And you can see this officer pull William Green out of the vehicle, walk him to his squad car, and at that time, he sat him in his car, and 5 minutes after he sat William Green in his car, Michael Owen shot and killed William Green 6 times. He actually shot at him 7 times, missing once, in the torso, and he died very shortly thereafter. He was handcuffed behind his back and locked inside of that squad car when Michael Owen killed him. And that's what brought us to representing the Green family and seeking justice, civil justice on their behalf.
Yeah, one of the clips that we showed was the police chief, the commissioner, and he said, I think it was the day after the shooting.
Literally.
He said, I've never seen this in my career. I appreciated the fact that he did that, right? Because this is horrific. But your case was not only against the officer, but also against the Prince George's County Police Department, correct? And let's explain that a little bit, because Owen, former Officer Owen, did not have, I mean, he had other incidents in his life where they failed to address them, and that's why he was still carrying a gun and a badge, and he did what he did with Green, right?
Well, the Prince George's County Police Department has had problems for years. They've been under federal supervision twice. Every kind of racism permeates the department. Black officers don't get a fair shake in any way at any stage of their careers. White officers dominate how the department is run and the culture of the department. It's a mess. And nobody's addressed it systemically at its foundation. And so you would think that cell phone video cameras would be a deterrence against this kind of behavior. No. The habits of many of these police officers are so deeply ingrained in its racism that they do things reflexively racist when emergent circumstances occur. So they're brutal, not all of them. And when I talk about this department, I'm not talking about every officer. I think only fools would think I'm doing that. I'm talking about the hardcore racists who have never been kept from being a part of the department by psychological screening, because that basically is non-existent for years in the Prince George's County Police Department, as is the case in Baltimore. And so you get all of these people in the department who are unfit to be police. And you hear, there are only a few rotten apples in the barrel. Well, look, if the rotten apples are there long enough, the whole barrel is spoiled. And that's what we're seeing around the country. This is not just a Prince George's County police problem, it's a national problem.
Now, this case was there was no lawsuit ever filed. You settled the case. I think it was, 4, 5, 6 months after the event?
Actually, 8 months.
It was highly unusual. What was the incentive, and it was settled for $20 million, if I remember correctly, right? What was the incentive for the county to settle the case, rather than go to trial, drag it out as everybody else does?
Well, they knew what we could do at trial. Our trial record is beyond excellent. It is one of the best in the history of the country. And so when we get involved, it's like the new sheriff comes to town and takes charge and kicks ass. And so there was that. The second thing that existed in this case was Malcolm's research. I mean, when Malcolm gets involved in looking at your background, you better watch out, because he's going to find everything that is relevant to your credibility. And this police officer had a terrible, terrible history, and he should not have been on the force. And Malcolm can give you the details of it.
The Prince George's County Police Department should have known that Michael Owen created a completely unreasonable risk to his citizens, probably at least 5 to 6 years before he killed William Green. He had been involved in 2 prior shootings, and those shootings had caused him to be diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Despite that, and despite him claiming workman's comp with his own police department, his department and the county government was completely unaware of his condition.
Let me get this straight. He's still on the force. He was still on the force. He was diagnosed with PTSD?
Correct.
Was he collecting money for that disability while still on the force?
He had been declared partially permanently disabled as far back as 2014 due to his PTSD. And he was collecting disability because of that diagnosis.
While collecting his full pay?
Correct.
Yes. This is insane.
Complete government malfeasance.
Let's add insult to injury. The Prince George's County was forced, when it was first put under federal supervision, to have a system that would flag automatically, based on the data that they could collect about the officers, any problem officer. It malfunctioned for the whole previous time that it was implemented. And finally, in the second phase, or second attempt at putting the police under supervision, it worked. And so it alerted on this guy before the shooting occurred. They didn't bring him in. So every which way the system could malfunction, it malfunctioned. There have been subsequent suits brought against the department where they proved systemic racism throughout the department. And so when Malcolm and I put all of this stuff together, we didn't need to file suit. All we had to do was slide the paperwork over to the other side of the table, and they looked at us and they looked at the facts, and they said, oh, we got to settle this. And so it was a record settlement.
And on top of that, this is probably one of the worst cases of police brutality that has ever happened in this country.
In your investigation of Corporal Owen, you discovered there are other incidents, a total, I think, of 7. I believe you have located 4, definitely, that you're including in a mass action against the Prince George's County Police Department.
And against Owen.
And against Owen.
That's correct. It was 7 different incidents, about 9 different victims, in our view, who Corporal Owen, across his 10-year career, had brutalized for no reason, no legal justification. He abused his power on a regular basis, and Prince George's County knew, or should have known, of if not all, but most of these incidents and victims. The mass action clients that we have are members of this group of victims of Corporal Owen, who were assaulted within about a year, a little over, before William Green was murdered by Corporal Owen.
There's every reason to believe that the group is larger than 7 by a factor of probably 10 or 20. Let me give you an example. There is a woman whose sister is a lawyer, who was stopped when she was in a parking lot because the license tag showed that her car was not insured. And so Owen arrests her. Instead of giving her a ticket, arrests her because she kept asking, what am I being arrested for? And he puts her in the back seat of the car, and she continues to ask him, why are you doing this to me? Why are you arresting me? He pulls over on the side of I-95 and gets out of the car and goes and chokes her in the back seat. Chokes her. And she immediately filed a complaint as soon as she was released, and they never investigated it. They never did anything. They never got back in touch with her.
She's one of your clients, too.
No, its statute of limitations expired. And you know, you can only go back 3 years. And so just think of how many other people he must have done this to over the course of his, how many years?
10-year career.
10-year career.
We have one of the victims of Corporal Owen, and we're going to bring him on now. It is my great privilege to introduce Jerry Costin Sr. to the show. Welcome to the show, Jerry.
Thank you.
Jerry, you're part of a mass action that has been filed on behalf of you by this firm, by Billy's firm. Tell our audience, because you've had an unfortunate incident with the former police officer, Corporal Owen. What happened with you?
I actually had an incident with me and my family on a couple of days before Christmas. My family called me out to assist them with a vehicle being broke down, which is Dan's. My daughter was with my niece. They're waiting with my niece because that was her vehicle was broke down. So me and my son riding, and I told him it'd be a while before I get there or whatever, you know, to assist them. So once I got there to assist my niece, talking to her, explaining to her, you know, she going through too many vehicles fast, you know, what's wrong with the vehicle. So she said it was knocking or whatever. So I looked at it, she put oil in it, and long story short, I looked down in the car because I wanted to make sure it was all-wheel drive or front-wheel drive or whatever, because I had to tow it, which way I need to tow the vehicle. As I was doing that, a gentleman, you know, approached the vehicle and was basically saying that he has been shot. I didn't know what was going on. I was trying to, you know, keep him back from my family and talking to him at the same time. And eventually, like someone come up and say, you know, put your hands up, put your hands up. And he was basically talking to the gentleman. So I looked at the gentleman and he was like, they shot me. And I'm looking like, what? And I was like, oh, still telling him to get back. And he looked at me again and said, they shot me, man, they're gonna kill me. And I was just basically telling him, you know, telling him to get down and keeping him in between me and my family like that. And the officer too, and I was backing up at the same time. Next thing you know, all the officers, you know, I told my son, call 911 for him. Once I did, all the officers just rushed me and my son, guns through me and my family head, and you know, put my son down on the ground, you know, put a gun to his head and roughed me all up and stuff like that. And I'm applying, telling him, that's my son, you know, he's only 16 years old. As that going on, no one listened. Officer don't listen. Officer Owens grabbed me and pushed me up on the vehicle and slammed me all around, you know, and it's mistreated me, you know. It's mistreated me the whole time while I was there, you know, and actually, after he had me in handcuffs, he choked me, slammed me on the ground, pushed me on the ground, you know, choked me while I was in the car, and just having nightmares about the stuff, you know, constantly happening to me about stuff like that, you know, about that officer, you know, and it's frightening me, you know, about him.
So when you see the police today, And you're driving down the street. What are your immediate thoughts?
My reaction, like I don't want to see him or deal with him. Like, you know, like I just had another incident the other day, just minding my business, and they just provoke, you know. It's just the system that they have, or whoever treating them or talking to them, is provoking them to do things that they shouldn't do. In my eyes, you know. In my eyes, that's what I think, and I think it's out of control. You know, I really think it's out of control.
And you've had other friends probably have the same problem, right?
Friends, family members.
How do you see this changing?
Number one, whoever hiring them, you know, need to, just like how they do anyone else, mentor them, you know, as they've been young police officers, mentor them, make sure they're doing the job correctly, or if there is a police officer for the first 2 years or something, make sure they don't have a gun, have a taser gun or something like that, or, you know, to protect them or something like that, so they can get familiar of what to do, what not to do in certain circumstances, you know, like that. That's my opinion.
Do you still have nightmares about this?
I had nightmares all the time. Can't sleep sometimes, you know. In the middle of the night, I wake up, just lay there. I just don't even like talking about it, because you know, it's like retracting your head up. How many times this happened to you? You know, how many times that a police officer just put hands on you or mistreat you, and you're a man. You ain't doing nothing wrong. I'm working. I'm doing something productive.
How did the fact that this occurred in front of your family affect you?
I'm supposed to be a protector of my family. You know, a man supposed to protect their family, all means necessary. And at that time, you know, I couldn't protect my family. Couldn't protect my daughter, my son, you know, and that's just like you get in a fight with Mike Tyson or something. You know, they gonna remember that for the rest of their life. What happened? You know, what they do, what they seen, what they had in spirit.
How old are your kids?
At the time, it was 16. Now he 18. My daughter at that time, she was 19. Now she's 21. And my niece, she's in late 20s.
Yeah. So they have the same viewpoint of the police as you have, because they've seen it all. Yeah. It's really unfortunate, you know, to live in that environment.
Well, let me tell you how bad it is. I know very few people who haven't either been brutalized themselves, black people, or had a close friend or relative be brutalized, or seen brutality occur. This is such a normal experience for black people that it has been the bane of my existence as a lawyer. And for a long time, nobody was doing anything about it. Nobody was suing the police. And starting in the 70s, that's what I did. And for a long time, we've held the highest verdict in the history of policing in Maryland, $44 million against a police officer who rammed our client headfirst into a brick wall because he was upset that he had said something insulting to a white woman. And so because of that, he was paralyzed from the neck down. So this is something that is a cause for us. We don't have a choice in the matter.
Well, thank God you're out there doing it, because these changes need to be made.
It's outrageous.
No question about it. I want to thank you very much, Sherry, for coming on the show. And good luck with what happens in the future. And be careful, because, you know, things ain't going to change overnight, unfortunately. I mean, we talk about 1965, Civil Rights Act, right? What year is this now? 64, yeah. This is like, you know, many, many, many years later, and there may be some ink on a piece of paper saying you're supposed to do things right, but people aren't following the rules.
Let me tell you how bad it is. I did a film to educate the entire black community about police brutality. It's called The 10 Rules for Dealing with the Police. And when it first came out, we sold it at very low price, but we decided to give it away. And so you can find it on the internet on YouTube. It's called The 10 Rules for Dealing with the Police. I urge everyone, whether they're black or brown or poor white, to watch the movie and behave yourself accordingly. It's as though look, when you're not an animal trainer, you better be very submissive when you're out there in the world of policing, because they approach the car at night with their fingers on the trigger and their hands on the gun.
Again, thank you very much for coming out here. I appreciate it.
No problem, sir.
We also have with us today Nikki Owens, who is the cousin of William Green, and we're going to bring her on right now. It is my great pleasure to introduce Nikki Owens to the show. Welcome to the show, Nikki.
Thank you.
You are the cousin of William Green, correct?
Yes.
Tell our audience what kind of guy he was.
He was fun. He loved family. He liked to cook and entertain. He was just overall a really good person. He brought us all together.
Mm-hmm. Nickname Boo Boo.
We called him Boo Boo. We didn't call him William.
When you first found out what had happened to him, that he was murdered, what was your reaction?
I cried. It came early. The call came early in the morning from his brother. He called my husband. He didn't call me. He called my husband, and he woke me up. The strange thing is that I rarely watched the news, but that night I worked late and I had the news playing in my office, and I actually heard the story on the news. And I was like, they're going to figure out how to cover this up. And I turned it off. So when he woke me up that morning and told me, I knew immediately how he was killed.
And walk us through what happened after that, emotionally for you.
Emotionally, I was a wreck. Emotionally, I cried for probably about 5 to 10 minutes. I just cried, and I couldn't believe it. I had just seen him about 2 weeks ago. He had come down to the house. So I just cried. And then my logical self kicked in. And I said, you know what to do. And I called my job, and I told them I won't be in today, and I'll probably need to take a few days off. I got dressed, grabbed my laptop, and I told my husband we need to head up to Maryland. And on the way up to Maryland, I started looking for attorneys. I started doing research.
And you came across Billy's firm, right?
I came across Billy's firm. I was familiar with Billy's firm, but I just started doing more research on them, looking at some other cases that they had, not just whether they had dealt with cases like this, but other cases. So they had a pretty big portfolio on the things that they dealt with. It wasn't just, police brutality. So I had made a decision by the time I had gotten up there. I asked my uncle if my aunt had contacted an attorney, and he said no. So I started making phone calls.
In this case, Owen has been in jail pending trial. When is his trial, by the way?
His trial is actually not set now until February of 2023.
And why is it so far out?
Mostly because of COVID. The courts have simply just been backed up. I know this family would have much rather for the criminal case to have proceeded already so that they could have closure on that side of this case as well.
Have you gotten any indications from anyone, including him, about why he did what he did?
I think that there is information out there about there potentially having been some sort of disagreement or struggle inside the car. But it really doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, no matter what happened in that car, there's nothing that Boo Boo could have done that would have warranted what happened to him and how this officer treated him, abused him, murdered him.
You have now become an advocate. And what does that involve for you?
It involves a lot of crying, a lot of disappointment, a lot of learning about a broken justice system.
What do? Are you part of a group? Did you form a group?
I am starting a nonprofit, but it will not focus like on activism per se, more or less helping people. But I do work with the ACLU and Community Justice, a few local activist groups. I'm learning. There's a lot that I'm still learning, but I just feel like I need to use his story to, one, let other people know that they're not alone. Like, there are so many people out here who have been victims of police brutality, and out of fear or just out of feeling alone, they don't speak up. So I want to use my voice to say, hey, you're not alone. Like, come out here and join us in this fight. Come out here and talk about your loved one. And then I do take my time and go speak to delegates and people who are trying to create laws to stop this from happening.
Well, you're doing a good thing because, you know, it's what Martin Luther King said one time. He says, you know, the problem is if you're apathetic, nothing changes. You know, business cannot continue the way it is, right?
So they say you cannot stand for injustice to exist anywhere.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I want to thank you very much for coming down and being on the show, and good luck with your nonprofit. Keep up the good work. We need a lot more people like you.
Thank you.
In this show, you're kind of reaching out to people in the area, Prince George's County area. If you've been victimized by a former police officer, Corporal Owen, you should come forward to your firm, right?
We are comprehensively investigating continuously Prince George's County Police Department. We have additional cases that we plan to file throughout this year against this department. We have victims who have had their homes broken into by police officers, victims who have been slammed on their heads for carrying legal firearms. We have victims who have been mistaken completely unjustifiably for other alleged suspects and detained for no reason. We have people who have been tased in the back. This police department has a fundamental problem that still exists right now, and we intend to be the ones to bring this to bear and to make certain that there is accountability and change that happens with their government, with their police leadership, and with the everyday line police officers in Prince George's County.
This is all included in your mass action.
It is included.
Correct.
In the sense that each one of these cases, in order to get federal jurisdiction, you have to show a pattern and practice over a considerable period of time in a police department that gets you to the level where the police department is now liable. It's not just the officer. And if there is a pattern and practice of brutality that exists in almost every police department in the United States, if you get the evidence, if you do the homework, if you do the investigation, you produce that evidence at the trial because it is essential to holding the police department liable. And so that's what we do. We do this all over the country. We will go anywhere, anytime, to make sure that justice is done when this kind of misbehavior, serious misbehavior,
And widespread.
occurs. Yes, it's definitely widespread.
Yeah, and it continues. I know in the Breonna Taylor case, for example, down in Dallas, the police officer, I looked at the animation diagram. Did you see this about the officer that shot 17 rounds into the apartment and killed her? He has never been charged for anything. So I hear what you're saying, but there's another big problem where the police departments are not remedying or getting rid of these problem police officers, and they're still on the street with a gun.
Well, that's exactly why what Billy said is so important. What he's talking about is the very narrow window in federal law where you can directly sue a municipality and hold them directly liable for ignoring, essentially, a pattern that they should have known, a policy that they condoned that allows their officers to violate the constitutional rights of their citizens.
Let me explain it in a couple of sentences. In state court, you often run into caps on damages. They're arbitrary. They keep people from getting proper compensation. So you have to bring the case in federal court because there are no caps on this kind of liability because it's a constitutional issue. And so what you have to do to prove federal liability is to show a pattern and practice of whatever it is that matches the police officer's misbehavior. So if it's brutality, you got to show pattern and practice of brutality. If it's false arrest, you got to show pattern and practice of false arrest. If it's false testimony, which is widespread, you got to show pattern and practice of that.
Many incidents.
Yes. And so to plead these cases, you have to understand the background of these departments so thoroughly that the department knows you're on to them, the department knows you can prove it, and the county is scared. And those of us who do this work know how to do that. And we have a great track record of bringing people to justice. After all, we represented the Freddie Gray family. And we didn't have to file suit to get justice for Freddie Gray because our reputation was so strong for being able to bring home the bacon at trial that they thought a trial would expose them to even greater liability. And so that's how we do it. That's how we get justice for people.
You know, it's interesting you bring this up because it seems, and you know, I've done a lot of shows around the country in different cities. For example, Oakland. I interviewed the police commissioner there. And they've been under federal supervision for 20 years. 20 years. You know, and John Burris, you know who he is. John Burris and a number of other lawyers have made a career of trying to change things. Do you see, as a result of your mass action, do you see the Prince George's County Police Department changing, getting rid of the bad apples in upper management and having new policies implemented and getting rid of the bad cops on the street? Do you see that happen?
Well, funny thing happens. When you have people elected as the chiefs of counties, like in Prince George's County, black woman who used to be a prosecutor, when you see that caliber of person coming into public office, you also see a desire, strong desire to reform the departments. But you also see massive resistance by the police unions and by others who are not interested in purifying the system. They're not interested in reform. They want to keep things rolling the good old-fashioned way where you could just whip some butt anytime you wanted to do it. And that was part of the integral part of how you policed the entire black community in that particular jurisdiction. So we have hope that the current county executive.
Well, let me say, when you have hope, usually someone learns a big lesson when they have to pay a lot of money, right? The problem I've seen throughout America is that, take the Chicago Police Department, for example. They owe right now, I think, about $500 million in settlements for police brutality, excessive force, murders, the whole 9 yards. But do you know who pays that? The taxpayer.
Do you know why they pay it?
Because it's a government entity.
No, they pay it because these government entities refuse to get insurance. There are counties in this country where the entire, well, let me put it this way. There are states in this country where the entire state is insured against this kind of liability. So we know it can be done. New Jersey, for example, you don't have a problem getting paid because they have insurance. Now, here's what insurance does. Insurance provides a layer of risk management to government, which disincentivizes government from having bad police officers because insurance companies see them the same way the black community sees them. They're a liability. In the insurance case, it's a financial liability. In the black community's case, it's a body liability. And so when you have insurance, you have a component that is against bad cops. Will force you to get rid of bad cops because bad cops create big verdicts, big outcomes financially that you're talking about. So counties don't have to worry about this. It's a false choice. If they get insurance, they don't have to worry. The big risk to a county when they have insurance is losing their insurance because they are permitting brutal police. And so insurance is a deterrent against this. But for some reason, they don't want to do it. And I think the mentality that causes governments to not get insurance against this is the same mentality that swept it under the rug forever. You know, we can deal with this. We don't need to pay insurance. And so that day is over.
It's also the mentality, though, that they want to pay less money and blame that on not wanting to tax the taxpayers. And I think that that lies exactly in what you're saying, is that they're dealing with the problem the same way that they've dealt with managing the police department.
Well, we call it the big squeeze. They say, man, we can't pay you what this case is worth. We're municipalities going to raise taxes. And they say this to the population. No, you big dummy. Get insurance like every other business. If you're running a business and you're not properly insured, you're a stupid executive. And we've been plagued with mayor after mayor after mayor who are too stupid to get insurance. It's horrifying and it's inexcusable.
Congratulations on the Green case and good luck with the mass action. And I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you. It was wonderful to be here.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.